So I'd like to introduce Kia Weatherspoon. She leads Determined by Design and has a number of credentials, which I don't necessarily know, but ASID, NCIDQ, and DFA. I'm sure she can explain those to us. She is with a minority and veteran-owned business and bringing design equity to affordable and supportive housing, which is just incredible to see. And her firm's practice really focuses on making interior design a standard for all and not just a luxury for a few. I will say that she's really shifted the narrative in interior design, and that's really exciting. And we can't wait to hear about this DC project that she's been working on. I think we might also get Michael Hindle. Is Michael here? Yeah, okay. So Michael's, I think many of you know Michael. He is a CPHC and a principal of Passive to Positive. He was a professional artist before, so I think there's some connection with Kia because of that. And he did that until he became a passive house consultant and is working on zero energy and living building challenge projects from single family to multifamily and all the way from Washington, D.C. to New Hampshire. So we do see him a lot in Massachusetts, which is great. So I'm going to hand it over to Kia.
Hi, happy Wednesday, everybody. I am really excited. It is very often, it's not that often that I walk into the room and I don't know a lot of people. So this feels really refreshing and new. So I will please ask questions. I scan the Zoom room. So it could go anything like, Shannon, I see you're nodding your head there. You want to speak up? So I will call on you. Prescott gave me the nice big smile there. So I appreciate it. Thanks for the thumbs up, John. And he's eating lunch. Love it. We got to do it nowadays. And I'm really excited. Funny because all the acronyms, interior designer that's done a lot of great work in a short time span. And I tell people that I'm interior design, which is perceived as a luxury trade and craft. And then I tell them that I do affordable housing, and I talk about equity, they make this face and then they go, oh, so you're not for profit. And I'm like, no, we are a profitable business. And I think our success is deeply rooted in choosing to do the work of the people and for the people, and remembering that that is our responsibility when it comes to creating communities, no matter what your role is, when it comes specifically to housing and how we create elevated and equitable housing for everyone. We do not subscribe to this notion of design as a luxury. You will not hear me say that. Luxury is a commodity. The minute something is mass produced, it is actually no longer a luxury. So I'm excited to talk about this project today, to talk a little bit more about Determined by Design, what it is that we do, and the actual importance of our process. And then how I also found out, just like the interior design consultant, the passive house consultant is the lowest person on the totem pole too. So that is how Michael and I actually bonded and connected on this particular project. And I have some slides. And again, please, at any point, raise your hand, ask questions. I know Michael is going to be a part of this conversation as well, because it really was a collaborative effort. We ready? Sounds good?
There we go.
All right, fantastic. Again, Kia Weatherspoon. I love how we're going to talk about interior design today, but the crux of a lot of what we do at DBD is talking about this idea of leading with humanity and how we create spaces for people. This project is specifically going to focus on affordable and low-income housing. We can go to the next slide. Thank you all for having me here. This is the first, so I'm really excited to kind of be in this space with you all today. The project that we are going to be talking about is Berry Farm. If anyone is familiar with Washington, D.C., Berry Farm is one of the largest public housing redevelopments currently happening in the district. It will be a 4-building development, and there are 2 affordable housing components, both a family component and then a senior living component. Next slide. And a part of that actual project and who some of our partners are is Grimm & Parker, EDG. They were our architectural partner here. The developer is POA, which is the Preservation for Affordable Housing. And they are based out of Boston, but they do work all over. And then we also work with Michael Hindle on this project. And the GC is Hamill Builders. And just a little bit more context about the overall project is this is a 115 unit senior living affordable housing project. We're going to go to the next slide. Oh, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. One of the things that we often talk about at Determined by Design is design equity. It is not a buzzword. It is not a trend. We actually trademarked design equity about 7 years ago before everyone was talking about it, because what we realized, or what we saw, there was a huge disconnect in the way housing for people of color and in low-income communities were designed and created versus those of their market rate or luxury counterparts. So we really had this call to action to make spaces better and equitable. Also realizing, if anyone has ever read The Color of Law, it's a very dry read, but it's a great read. It even talks about just kind of the systematic and the limited use of building materials when creating low-income housing and housing for people of color. But what I always really like to foot stomp from that book is that it takes 4 generations to undo the inequities that exist in housing and communities that exist. 4 generations. So I want you to think about that. That if you have kids, think about it's your kids, right? So the work that we're doing now is going to affect 4 generations of families. So for us, when we think about design equity and the spaces that we're creating, how do we do that? How do we champion creating elevated outcomes? And that is about seeking the story. We're going to go to the next slide. These were some of our partners. We're going to go to the next slide. This part of the story, if I was to ask you what a design concept is, depending on your knowledge of interior design, you'd probably hear things like, oh, mid-century modern, traditional, contemporary, right? Those are buzzwords, those are styles, and they are deeply rooted in ego. At Determined by Design, we do not strive for ego-based design or trends. It is also for us this idea of, we hear a lot this term placemaking. Communities have always existed. Their stories are there, their narratives are there. So we are focused on storytelling and story keeping. And that is a big part of our design process very, very early on when we enter into a project. Our goal is to create empathetic and concept-based design approach to provide equitable design outcomes for disenfranchised Black, Indigenous, and other minority people and communities. Notice that we did not hyphenate that word to say BIPOC. I think we're often, again, hearing that buzzword, that language, to lump everyone into one bucket, when really, when we're thinking about how we design for communities and neighborhood, it has to be specific to that community. Next slide. So I want to walk you through at a very high level the concept process for Berry Farm here in Washington, D.C. For us, we always start with who were the original caretakers of the land, and always searching for that Indigenous story and or touch point. What you start to see here is some of our concept imagery. So Berry Farm, when it was really native land, was actually a fishing village and or point. It's also known as the Hills Jail area, which literally is topography, is these kind of subtle rolling hills. And then Berry Farm, it was the kind of original housing for the freedmen, slaves, and hospital. So this is where what it really was post-war housing. Howard Schultz, who is the kind of Howard University and the Yard, historic HBCU in Washington, D.C. The Yard is iconic for this centralized point. And then there were also, if anyone from DC in the chat, just kind of put in the chat if you're from the district or the DC area. If anyone knows anything about DC, go-go music is the sound of the Washington, DC, Maryland area. And one of the most famous bands to come, go-go bands to come out of Berry Farm was the Junkyard Band. So go-go music is really this deeply rooted identity for DC, Eartha Kitt, the Goodman League. There were all these kind of historic figures and movements that came from this kind of housing project. Next slide. Okay, Bev with the quick facts, love it. The Goodman League, it was really this haven for the community, rooted in basketball. Nike does this huge event every year where they come and they do street ball. And, you know, when we were looking at all these kind of factors around this surrounding neighborhoods, it was really critical for us to now start to think of imagery. You will never see pictures of another person's interiors or architectural vernacular. What we're trying to evoke is this more visceral feeling, this more abstract construct. So as you're starting to look at these images, we're really reinforcing all of our historical touch points. So this idea of ascension, a point, a center, go-go music is a full sensory sight, touch, sound, the Yard. Next slide. Which means our concept became, talk about a brain fart, hold on. Opening the senses to ascension. That was our concept for this particular project. And now I want to kind of shift to some of our priorities that as they kind of overlap our design process. Next slide. So our first process or our first priority is always beauty. We hear a lot about health, safety, and welfare, and it's very heady. But for us, beauty is about softness, decoration, adornment, and texture. So when we were looking at those images, we talked about this idea of ascension and this subtle movement and curves. So some of the things that you start to see as soon as you walk into this lobby is you start to see these colored, these slightly curved accents on the ceiling. You see these very light gray movements of ascension, moving your eye kind of through this space as soon as you walk in. What you see to your right in this image is you start to see names of some of those historic figures. You see the Goodman League right here at the top right. You see Elizabeth Chase, Frances Eliza Hall, who was one of the first Black educators in the district. You see Lieutenant Milton Bernhardt, who was one of the first Black Army pilots. So again, all of these kind of figures coming out, and I'm going to talk about this wall in a little bit as more in a bit, but again, beauty was a really, really critical component and priority for us always. Next slide. Health and wellness. I think we hear a lot about healthy building materials. What does it mean to have healthy products in the actual spaces? But then also, what does a healthy lifestyle look like? So here, what we have in the community room area of this space, we have opportunities of a live green wall, but then we also see this kind of wall on the right here with all these plants, where we are really promoting like the activity and the growing together of the actual residents and the families in this building. So we had went to another senior living project, and we had did this amazing yoga room, and then I'm walking the site, and there were all these house plants in the yoga room, and we were like, we didn't design it this way. What's happening here? And what was happening is all the residents were bringing all their house plants down into the yoga room and kind of having this indoor garden of sharing and growing together. So what we learned from that is how can we create spaces to bring people down to literally grow together in this kind of healthy activity. So this is from a DD presentation. This project is actually under construction right now, but what we have here are literally grow lights that will kind of wash this area in the community room so the residents can grow plants. But it also kind of speaks to some of the healthy building materials that we did use in this actual project. So outside of the live green wall, we have limited LVT in the common areas. I will definitely do that, John. We have limited LVT in the common areas, but I'm going to talk about some additional information on that and some of our partnership with the Healthy Buildings Material Lab. I'm going to go to our next slide. Vibrancy, color, texture, and every touch point is really critical for us. So my mother, I've always held dear to me. She said doing laundry for her is the relaxing and it's therapeutic. It's a calming. So vibrancy for us is even in all these smaller touch points, how can we bring vibrancy, color, lighting, decorative elements into these projects? So here we have is a laundry room. Really thinking about how can we elevate this experience that's on every corridor floor, but bringing color, lighting, decorative elements, and touch was really one of those things that we foot stomped. Lighting is a critical component here, and I might have to scroll down to see if Michael's on yet. But we will definitely be talking about some of the challenges that we overcame together when it came to kind of like passive house principles and what we were trying to achieve from a design perspective. Next slide.
I'm here, Kia. It's good to see you.
Education is another kind of vital and critical piece. We always like to think about education as access, thinking about moments of education and touch points, not just for the residents, but what extends beyond the communities. There's a lot of what we do at Determined by Design is about mentorship. So when we have local projects, what we try to do is we are partner with a local middle, high school, and collegiate area. And we kind of immerse those students into our design process. So not only do they understand that creating spaces for their communities is a career path, but also a lucrative one, and what the impact of that can have. We also like to rethink what access to education and technology means for seniors, and no longer in these more antiquated kind of business center, but realizing that technology has advanced. And how can we create these educational moments and opportunities for the residents in this particular project? Next slide. Oh, wait, can we go back one quick second? We also like to integrate local artists. This is a local artist. While it's not rendered accurately, what we decided to do is we created these acrylic panels that are custom, and what they will do, they will filter in sunlight. It's a backlit, cool edge light system. Again, those large light installations, me and Michael will talk about that. But for us, it was really about working with local artists and artisans and creating a visceral experience as people traverse through the spaces. Next slide. Why does this matter? People often, when they think about the interior design consultant, when we talk about design equity, a big part of what we have to do is challenge our partners. I think our development partners, our housing authority partners, at times their bias is unprecedented in how they design for people from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. I feel oftentimes it's our counterparts in the built environment and industries who we don't see each other and realize that collectively we are in this fight to create equitable spaces for each other. And if we are all on one accord, the outcomes that we create for all people will be uplifted. So for the next 4 generations, as us as a whole community, we can do better. This matters because in all of our disciplines, diversity, equity, there still tends to be this lack of seeing people who mirror the communities that we serve, right? I don't see a lot of Black interior designers or Native architectural partners or Latina architectural partners, right? So the humanity piece, the collective conversation among us should be to really see the people we're serving, not based off of their socioeconomic status, but as families, as brothers and sisters. So collectively, we can do better and create communities that uplift people. Next slide. So we had, there was a lot of overlap between what Michael and I do at Determined by Design, and I didn't know it. One of the things I always like to say is I am not afraid to be ignorant in a room. People often hear this word ignorant and they cringe, but it's really just a lack of knowledge. And Michael and I were on an early project call, and I was on my soapbox about equity and better spaces. And Michael was like, oh my God, I deal with that too in Passive House. And so we kind of bonded very quickly. And I wanted to invite him to kind of talk about some of the push and pull points of our project based off of our priorities and based off of his priorities. So Michael, you ready? We ready to pull back the curtain?
Pull it back. Tear it away. We're ready.
All right. So beauty was one of the kind of critical points that was really, really important to us. That was from texture, materiality. But I think where Michael and I struggled isn't the right word. One of those earlier images was of this illuminated wall. We had a massive amount of decorative light fixtures. If you think about the output that a grow light puts out, an integrated, motion activated illumination of historic figures. Michael, let's talk about some of the challenges of what was happening when we had this excessive amount of kind of decorative fixtures and lighting elements in this project.
Sure. And I think the best way to talk about it is to say that we, passive to positive on the consulting end, our task is like the energy stuff, but we also care about these priorities first, really, right? Like we can't forget the human priorities and the human occupants. So when we saw Kia's installation, we thought, oh, that is cool. Let's figure this out. I want to use this to highlight the fact that when we're certifying a building, many of us have, we have a given number that we need to hit. And I think that that begs us all to ask, what is the appropriate balance between making sure this particular community has the right, correct, deserved access to beauty and vibrancy and education? That installation, Kia, represented beauty. It represented the vibrancy of the community and just sort of a mood. And it was deeply educational about the history of the community. Therefore, we thought it should be there. Now, we wanted to connect. And this is no way a criticism of POA, because anyone who knows POA knows that they want to do the right thing across the board. But when you have a normal design workflow, as everyone probably on this call knows, it has its own momentum. And there are consultants with their own criteria. And I think we could have done better to connect and say, okay, you got this many LED bulbs in there, but how many of them are actually burning at any one particular time? And then the question is, what will FIAS accept as an electrical load for this? And I think we could have done better to get there, but for the momentum and the design exigencies of a multifamily project with so many things to worry about. And if FIA says, well, just put it on as if it's on all the time, that's the wrong answer.
Yep.
What is the right answer? Well, it would take us connecting and really working it out and working with our electrical engineer. And I have to say, I think that, we could have done a little better on our end of making sure that you and the electrical engineer and us all got together to validate this impulse to have this beautiful art piece. So all that just to say, Passive House, obviously everyone on this call loves it, is committed to it, is dedicated to it, but how we execute it in the midst of these complex design processes and workflows matters a lot. We have to know when we have to put the brakes on, step back, put a pin in something and say, this is a priority. So it was a challenge because there was a lot of electricity. It actually threw us over our internal heat gains and it pushed us over on cooling.
It
That sort
did.
of lighting alone.
But I think we also were like, okay, we went back to the vendor and was like, this is where we need to be. We reduced the amount of remote drivers.
Right.
It was actually motion activated.
Right.
So the more people moved through the space, which was what we were trying to promote for the seniors, because this was a senior housing project, we wanted to promote movement. We literally wanted to make sure it was only illuminated based off of the number of people that were currently or actively moving through that main lobby area.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of education on our point and information that we had to get, but we really were committed to like literally illuminating the writings on the wall of kind of the historic figures and educating that no matter how that building might transition 3, 4, 5 years from now, we wanted to make sure we could do that. Now,
and so when
spoiler,
it comes down to, we have to define the loads first and how we define them. Did we accurately define them? And my guess is that we had to use placeholder numbers and it probably wasn't generous enough to the fact that it was movement oriented. So I guess what I'm just saying is we all know this already, but it's just sort of the call to action is, Kia, you and I have to get together and stay together, right? Like strong.
We go together now. I like to say that very often.
And we can't like check our humanity at the door to hit a Passive House standard, right? And then we have to find the accommodations to honor what's really important, which is the beauty, vibrancy, and education that art piece offers.
Yeah. So I want to also, Michael, talk about kind of like the education component. So we were the education and the health component. So Determined by Design has the partnership with the Healthy Building Materials Lab out of Parsons, where we are truly trying to create a healthy and beautiful unit. One of the things that we often talk about is kind of LVT and how it's toxic, right? There is no such thing as a non-toxic vinyl. So we try to avoid using that. We also try to push towards more mineral-based paints from a manufacturer called Kime. So from a kind of healthy building material standpoint, I feel like, Michael, this is where POA is actually, I would say, pretty much leading the charge, right? About their standards as developers. So that was a big push for us, but I think one of the things me and Michael geeked out about was kind of like, yeah, the unit could be like super healthy, but if the building is not sealed, the residents' utility costs go up. And I was like, really? Right. And I think that's how we kind of started to geek out of what does maintaining a healthy living lifestyle, how does that pull all the way through to the residents once the design team and the development partner have kind of left the project as left or stepped away from the project. Is that fair, Michael?
As things get going and the people with the vision sort of step back and let the design team work, you could almost say like we had to sort of be keepers of the flame in a way of some of these ideas. The design, I gotta say, the design team, the builder, POA, everyone has been excellent. But we all recognize that everyone is under pressure and everyone has limitations. You have to be really mindful to sort of spot these overlaps and follow them through. I would say the beautiful thing is like when we showed up at a DC housing meeting and we were both presenting on our respective fields, but we both tried to put a bigger lens on it.
Yep.
By putting the bigger lens on it, that's where those two lenses created the Venn diagram, the circle overlap. And I don't think we fully recognized until that point how much overlap there could be and what an alliance could be between interior design and Passive House. And it's really a beautiful thing. I'm very grateful for it. I'm speaking to you in a little cubicle at the Natural Buildings Symposium in New England, where the Natural Materials Lab or the Healthy Materials Lab is represented. Nice. And we've been through some of that material stuff, and it's super important. And POA is leading the charge. They do have a good design standard. However, I think it must be said that with the current economics, the way the way financing is done and economics, it's like, okay, you need the double loaded corridor. This is the way the building is going to be because of money, not because of people, but because of the way money comes into these projects, right? Those kinds of decisions are not always ours to make, however much we might like to. And it's still going to take a lot of effort and a lot of allied, supportive, mutually supportive conversations to find the alternatives. So I think that's also a call to action, that we can't forget the embodied toxicity while we talk about operational carbon or even embodied carbon. We have to remember the embodied toxicity. There are actually subsidies from the state of Louisiana to tell plants to go to Cancer Alley to make their polluting materials. So that's subsidized. Are we getting a subsidy to undo it? No, we got to work twice as hard, right? So this is a place where it really matters. Now, on the outside of the building, we don't have any continuous insulation. And I won't dive too deeply into that because this is, from your interior design lens, Kia, but I wanted to mention it only as a way in which we were trying to support the health, beauty, and vibrancy of the project by not using exterior foam insulation. We used all cellulose and had a vapor open exterior sheathing so that we could have a simpler building that was easier for the builders to build, and it wouldn't have the embodied toxicity impacts of the polyisocyanurate insulation. We almost got mineral wool on the roof instead of polyiso, but the roof warranty drove it. So if this is a lesson in systems thinking, the roof warranty is predicated on litigious society, on the manufacturer's needs to be protected, which then drives our material selection, which determines our embodied toxicity and embodied carbon. So we're not off the hook. We have to keep working for solutions. And so, but we're trying to honor the same priorities that you were, Kia, in terms of like reducing the amount of toxic materials in the building. We have a long way to go on that front.
Absolutely. And again, this idea of cost, right? So, this beautiful light thing that me and Michael, we work to save. Well, at the end of the day, I don't want to say it got value engineered out. It did not. They have budgeted for it. But at the end of the day, they did not want to commit to that type of story keeping. The property management team at the end of the day felt like, the cost to maintain it, and we gave them as much information as possible. So we didn't get that wall, right? Which was a key critical feature, but I think it spoke to a lot of some of the challenges. Like everyone has to be in full alignment for these kind of outcomes to stick. And then it was also a big education component of truly educating about the history of this community. I think I saw a question pop up about like the Native story. And yes, on that wall, there were kind of moments of Native historic figures as well as pulling that historical thread all the way through. But it was also a pretty big education point. There's another installation or art installation that did stay. So the minute someone sits in a booth, they'll hear more of an audio story. But again, it was really critical for us to kind of continue the narrative of the community. We had some very, I don't want to say aggressive, but pie in the sky goals around creating this like educational construction trailer with POA. It was this combined effort. Michael, you're laughing. Ben, you want to come to our phone calls? You sure? I drop a lot of F-bombs on the phone call, Ben. Just be mindful of that.
He's being very well behaved today.
We're doing so good. Michael, you want to talk about the construction trailer?
Well, it was pretty cool. Like Deanna Savage from POA, wonderful human being. I love working with her. And Julie, Deanna sent an email saying, okay, could we have this thing? And it was a little mini Airstream with a solar panel on it. It was like a battery bank and a solar panel. I said, can we plug this into the construction trailer? And so naive me, I wrote back and said, hey, let's just do a regenerative construction trailer from the ground up. It'll be built by local workforce. It'll be built all out of bio-based materials. It'll be comfortable, healthy, zero energy. And yeah, we can plug in the little mini Airstream battery and solar thing to power it. And then when it's done, we can shift it over to where we hope there will be an urban community farm, and reuse it as a community education center around watershed issues, around habitat, around sustainable regenerative agriculture. And everyone said, yay, 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 yay. But we had a charrette, which was lovely. And we all just were so excited. And then, you know, there's a phenomena when you said pull back the curtain, Kia, it resonates because, you know, there's a phenomena where there is a curtain always up between you and you and I, the design team, and the inner workings of development. Like, how is it happening? And, you know, you sort of whisper through the curtain, like, hey, are we still going to do that trailer? Or we yell through the curtain, like, hey, you know, we sent you a design. And then eventually you get an email back saying, it's too much for us to take on right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's just another lesson where even with the best intentions from the development team, there are limits to what each of these brilliant young people shepherding this project through construction, what they can take on at any time. So
do you think we should have started that conversation sooner?
It certainly would have helped. And, you know, we needed, well, one, we needed to start it sooner. Two, we needed not to have the changeover in the personnel and the development team when we did, which was just sort of, they were burdened with that question right away when they had so much else to contend with. DC codes are changing. The permitting for a mixed use building, which in passive housing, we know how to model it, we know how to get certified, but that's not how DC wants it to be reported from an energy perspective. So could we even do the project the way we wanted to do? Like, there were big questions going on. Oh, well, any commercial space has to be LEED. Well, you can't just do commercial LEED certification. So we have to certify the whole building. So these big questions were all swirling around. Everyone was getting frustrated and exhausted, drilling down on just one or two of them. And the trailer went by the wayside. But we've got a few more cracks at it because this project it's going to be more buildings. And in total, it'll be 1,100 units of housing. And to date, they're all passive house. That's a pretty big deal.
Well, I think that is a pretty big deal. And did I see a hand clap for that? I thought I saw a hand clap. That was you, Shannon. And I think it really, and I'm not trying to, I guess my thinking is, you know, for me, it's like, how, because it was also the education component, right? How do we create career paths and opportunities for the children and the kids in this neighborhood? So what got me excited about this construction space, the construction trailer, was it being like this incubator space, and how, you know, no matter what city or municipality you're in, some code is always changing. You're always tracking some other thing, right? Is that can that really be our scapegoat? Like, oh, it was so much happening. How can we make it a part of the design process on much more of the front end? And did we have alignment from our architectural partner on the trailer?
Well, it wasn't going to be the architectural partners. It was going to be us doing it. It was basically a rectangle. It wasn't going to be a major design challenge. I will tell you, just between you and me, top secret.
And everybody else on this call.
Yeah, and everyone else on this call.
Secret, y'all, secret.
My wife, Carrie, who led the regenerative design charrette for the trailer, she's continued to design it. And so next time we get together, the design is ready. Next time we don't have to ask permission to design it. We just do
That's my favorite thing to do, ask for forgiveness.
You know, we're not going to make any money on it. Like, Carrie put in the hours. I helped. I supported with some bio-based materials consulting and the energy side. But we've decided that we're not waiting. We're just designing stuff that we think needs to happen. We'd like to deploy it with you through projects. We'd like to have it be built by workforce development people, you know, in DC, the people we know in Baltimore. And we'd like to get it into high schools where there are these formaldehyde-laden, like, temporary classrooms that are nasty and poisonous and have terrible performance. My son learns in one of these things, and he's like, I cannot hear the teacher because the window shaker AC unit is right at my head. Like, he can't even hear, right? So he can't learn, and he's not comfortable, and he's not happy. So we could roll these things out, Kia, not just as construction trailers, but as educational modules for communities or for schools. so we're still in. So next time we get together, we'll see where we can find a place to deploy these things.
Michael,
Yeah.
that is amazing. And yes, it definitely needs to be on wheels
Yes.
because it needs to make the rounds.
No, yeah, absolutely.
I can't tell you how much I am thrilled and loving this conversation. We are going to continue it. But before we do, we're going to hand it over to Zach. He's going to thank sponsors, give us some announcements, and then we are going to come right back.
I'm going to
Thank
have
you.
to bow out because I have to go back to this seminar. I have a stop deadline at 1 o'clock. But thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you again, Kia, to speak with this whole community. I love y'all. I gotta go.
Thanks, Michael.
We
Thank
love
you,
you back,
Michael.
Michael.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Michael.
coming.
And Kia, this is so amazing. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll make this quick. So a big thank you to our sponsors who make everything possible for us here at the Accelerator, starting with our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA. Thank you also to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxter Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stillcorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a thank you to our patron sponsors, Brennan, Coltraco Ultrasonics, Euroline Windows, Holstrom System, Inotech Windows and Doors, Lamelux, Longboard Architectural Products, Owens Corning, RDH Building Science, and Sanderson Design.
Well, we are just at the top of the hour, perfect timing. So for those of you who have to go, you have a work deadline, we understand. Or maybe you're with us and it's nighttime where you are and you need to put the kids to bed or have dinner. So thank you for coming if you have to go. But if you can stay, we are going to go into the overtime and look at some of the questions here for you, Kia.
Perfect.
And yeah, before we do, I want to say the first time I saw you present was for Parsons, and you did that incredible presentation that made me cry because you talked about how design can fundamentally change people's lives in so many different ways. And you showed the entrance that a multifamily residents have to move through
Yes.
to get into their homes. And so they all
Yes.
have to move through this entrance. And this entrance had to be watched all the time. There had to be eyes on the door for
Mhm.
safety. And I remember you had this, just a profile figure of a child who had to enter every day through this door. And the first design they gave you was reminiscent of a prison.
Yep.
And you mentioned how many times this profile of this child had to go out into the world and look at it through plexiglass or look at it through safety glass or look at it through, a safety cage, for
Mhm.
security reasons. And how when they come home, what they see really matters, and completely changed that space. Still had eyes on the door, still maintained security, but it felt 100% like home. And I'll never forget it. If I did put a link in the chat, so all of you can watch that. There were a million other takeaways from that presentation, but that one was very, very powerful for me. So I noticed John Melansky was no longer with us. He was our first question. I'm going to make sure. Yep, John's gone. But he mentioned he'd love to hear more about how you gather feedback from residents before and after the design is in place.
So that's so specific to Berry Farm. In the DC, depending on where you are, like there's this conversation around displacement and gentrification. So we got to partner with some of the local organizations who were opposed to the development. For us, it was important for them to understand that we were looking through a very historical lens in our how we were creating these designs. We are, another one of our services is the People Design Firm services, where we do integrated community outreach. So we do meetings with the community in conjunction with the development partner. And separately of that, we also try to look at it from a lens of celebration. There's often a distrust. So she's like, hey, just come to this community meeting. Am I really going to want to do that? So we do kind of little touch points of maybe we have a bingo night, maybe we have a dance party. We'll do smaller kind of community events to build trust, but also having them understand what we do as the interior design firm. Because our perspective is often different from our architectural counterparts. No shade, no harm, no foul. So
As it should be. Yeah, as it should be, right? I mean, if you didn't bring a completely new level of understanding, we would miss a layer.
We would, and that sometimes our architectural partner is our biggest hurdle, right? And I think, Michael, he didn't get to speak to this, but at a certain point, there was a lot of pushback from our architectural partner on this project. But then when he was in it, he was our greatest champion. So this idea of being in full alignment at all parts of it is really critical. But after we do our kind of very preliminary community engagement, we also go back again after design development. Are we still to speak to the community? Are we still making sure that we've already approved it with the housing authority and the development partners? Absolutely. But we continue to go back to the community throughout the process of the project. And that's how we really focus on like community input and engagement through for longevity.
Great answer. Beauty, longevity, celebration, all the things that if I were going to live there, I would want to hear and then see. All right. Our next question is from someone who was here a moment ago. Let's make sure he's still here. Oh, looks like he had to go. That's Paul Kershaw from Cambridge, UK. He wanted to know, is the Native American history of the area taken into consideration? You may have already answered this.
Absolutely. So we've always, again, this idea of storytelling. So when we're doing research for our neighborhoods and the communities, we always go back to the original caretakers of the land. There is always an indigenous and or native story that is threaded through every one of our projects. Because I think there's been this big shift. We talk about the site. The site is a man-made construct, but the land and the original caretakers of the land is always our jumping off point when we're doing any type of historical research. That's the only way we know how to operate. I mean, we've had development partners, and this is where it's important to say we do it, but also realize the pushback we get, right? We've been in a presentation and we've done our whole thing about our concept and the historical context, the native context, and we get like, well, they're dead. Why does that matter now? Right. So even when we're met,
Michael has been talking about emergy a lot, and I know that emergy can relate to actual energy, but emergy, in my understanding, is the history of the place and is the energy from all the people that were there before you and all of the activities that took place before you. And it takes time to understand that and honor that. So I can see why you get the pushback and why you'd have to push right back yourself.
So I don't know if anyone's noticed. I've very rarely said client, right? I'll say partner, architectural partner, development partner. To do this work, you have to be in partnership, right? Because just like in real life, if your partner says some fuck shit, you'd be like, hey, babe, like, hey. But if as the consultant that's getting a fee, right? If I'm too afraid to push back because I won't be on the next deal or I won't get the next project, then the relationship stays transactional. And
then you end up a victim of that system's thinking, just like your decision making.
Exactly.
And your design ends up being a victim of that system's thinking.
So we have to be in partnership, right? I'm not going to always get it right. Like, again, this kind of idea of like, hey, I can be ignorant to a thing, but the humanity of the outcome I want, if we're in partnership, if we remove these so-called hierarchical positions,
the workflows, yes,
what sub-consultant you are, and bring back a lens of humanity and not fee and scope.
You mentioned on your Parsons presentation an email you sent where you replied all.
So
can you tell that story?
Yes. So I saw it somewhere in the comments about policy, city codes, something around that. I'm trying to zoom back up to it, but we were doing a huge project with NYCHA, right? And you know, they had a design standard in one of their design standards where they had to put tile in the units, right? And just in the kitchen. So they would have kind of an LVT or some type of resilient flooring, and then you had this hard stop to tile, right? Because of flooding and all this stuff. And we were like, okay, well, here's a product that it's called Technofloor. It's bio-based. That particular time, it was 95% moisture proof. And they kept saying, no, 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 you got to do the tile. We've always done tile. We've always done the thing we've always continued to do. That's wrong. It's ugly, unnecessary cost, right? So our architectural partner is just like, hey, guys, they said what they said. They're going to do the tile. And then our vice president, Sequoia Hunter Suje, she writes this massive email, like running down all the reasons why, yes, housing authority, we know this is your standard, but it is wrong. It's going to put an additional cost and burden, all these things. And she replies all to everybody on the thread, all the players. And then the architectural partner calls her. He's like, hey, do you know everybody was on that thread? And she was like, I did. Absolutely. Right? He's supposed to be backing us, not saying like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Right? At the end of the day, they ended up getting rid of the tile in the kitchen. Right? So had we not really stood our ground on using a healthier material, and just
you'll never know if you don't ask.
Yeah.
You have to share that. Thank you.
This
Thank
idea
you so
of
much.
Standards, right? So we're actually writing the new standards for the DC Housing Authority for all their senior properties. So we have this material matrix that we give, and in the units, we don't give an option for LVT. And someone was like, "Are you really going to do that?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." Because no matter
I see a big thumbs up from Stephen out there.
Thank you, Stephen. Because no matter how you spin it, LVT is toxic. And we give this little disclaimer, like there's no such thing as healthy LVT, no matter what the marketing or the greenwashing material says. But we're that blatant about it in this now governmental standard, right? That will go to A&D professionals in the district. Now, on the flip side, we fully understand that sometimes these green products, there's a green premium, right? So this is where the charge to action is for kind of our manufacturing partners. The green product shouldn't be 5 times more expensive, right? So I think there's this kind of push-pull of us collectively specifying more product, but also holding their feet to the fire that if it's for everyone and you want to be green for good sake, then that cost difference, it has to balance out somehow.
And you mentioned how you control costs, but I'm going to ask you that later when everyone else's questions get in, because I'm just going to call you after this and we're going to talk for like 3 hours.
Prescott, I love your comment.
Okay, our next question up is from Ben. Ben, you were with us a moment ago. Are you still here? Looks like you're here. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? I can ask it for you. Ben asked, do you have any known components for grow lighting strips that give a nice light for interiors in the market currently?
I can email it to you because I like to rely on my resources. My main lighting rep is Marissa at Alliance Lighting. I will make sure I get that information to you. And I'm going to put my email in the chat.
I'm just going to type Melissa at Alliance Lighting.
Marissa.
How do you spell it?
Marissa.
Okay, I got it right. Great. Perfect. And then folks can Google, and we've been dropping links in the chat for everyone to connect with you on LinkedIn, on your website. Perfect. And our next question up is from Catherine. Catherine, you've been so patient. Thank you. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? I see you walking around, Catherine. The papers on the desk are moving. All right, I can ask Catherine's question too. She asked if you had seen the series Home on Apple TV and mentioned that it very much speaks to the design of art and local histories in construction, beauty, and community. And Zach mentioned he loves it. I've never seen it. Have you seen
So
it?
I have seen it. Okay, look, I don't look now, I gotta be honest. We all new friends, but so I got pitched to be on the show Home for Apple, right? And I was like, what? And I think there is still this misconception about interior design, and it doesn't just mean home where one individual lives, right? And they could only see it in the essence. Well, Kia, can we come to your house and see what you've done in your house? And I was like,
Oh.
no, come to this project and see, but they needed a pretty reveal, right? They needed the big woo, right? The before,
Yeah,
the after.
yeah.
So while I think, one, I love Apple TV, Apple shows, A24, but there's still this commercialization of home, and it is very commercialized in the sense of it's a before and an after, or a short, concise project that they can put a pretty bow on it. And I think, like what me and Michael talked about, this has been 4 years of really creating elevated homes for people. So I haven't quite figured out how to bridge that gap of.
That's a great, that interests me so much, because we're on a form of media right now, right?
Mhm.
And what you're talking about is a recipe for 45 minutes of entertainment top,
Yeah.
right? And what you're actually doing in your practice is creating a lifetime and a building to serve multiple generations, and
Absolutely.
hundreds of people. So, and families. So
And it may not be a pretty picture at the end. Maybe it really is just understanding the process and the full capacity of what it means to create communities and home for people. So it was a hard, I mean, look, I love A24, I love Apple TV. So I was like, "Ooh, I want to do it." But my ego would have been like, "Let me get my house together real quickly and do a show." But that's not what I'm about, or I'm not an ego-based designer or person or firm. So yeah. But Prescott, what you said, it doesn't have to be cheap, it just has to look cheap. Amen, brother. Amen.
So you can talk about the price piece now, because I don't think we have any more questions. If anyone wants to jump in and chat, you're welcome to.
Yeah.
We've only got about a minute left before we have to close out.
I see.
Go
ML
ahead,
Bogos.
ML. Oh, you know what,
Hi.
ML? I meant to call on you. So thank you for waiting. Yes, please unmute.
Thank you. Perfect segue. Kia, I had never even heard of you before today. So brilliant. I talk about beauty. I talk about beauty on our planning board.
Mm.
It's a word that I think sends people into kind of like ooh. But the thing that came to my mind, and here's my question, it looks like what you're doing is you are provoking beauty to become a verb.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, beauty and softness and decoration. When we were just all locked up in the pandemic, right? What were the things in your house that brought you comfort? It was something soft. It was beauty, right? Beauty is about health, safety, and welfare, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. And to say it's like, oh, that's so heady, beauty. But think about how beauty affects us in our day-to-day, but yet we don't prioritize it when we're creating spaces for people.
Yeah, that it becomes a living component.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate you gave me that insight, and I'm just like, yeah, it's a verb. So
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate your work, and I'm sure I will be contacting you.
I'm glad you know me now.
Yes.
Steven,
And ML, I'm
your
going
hand.
to cruise up in the chat, and I'm going to drop that link in again for that presentation. If you get a chance to watch it, I know you'll be glad you did. But
Okay.
Kia, can you talk about, as just the last comment for today, how you control cost? You mentioned that sometimes the contractors don't want to give you the allowances. they're
Yes.
holding for something. They just want to tell you things are more expensive. Your things are
wanna-
too expensive.
I can talk about that, but Stephen, I saw your hand. Is your question quick? Because I can wrap that answer up in a bow in like less than a minute.
Well,
Yes.
I think that if we factor in the avoided cost of healthcare, and if the developers and builders had to be responsible for 30 years out of healthcare of the occupants of these buildings, they're going to be jumping over head over heels to get all the healthy materials they can get.
Absolutely. So they're going to have to, and it's also the cost of these healthy materials, right? So we did this exercise where we had specified a 4-inch square recessed light fixture in one of our projects. And we're in this meeting, all the players, and the GC's like, this fixture determined by design specified was $400. I was like, what? And they said, don't worry, we have a cheaper, uglier one that's $275. Now, remember my friend Marissa that was just in the chat. I text Marissa in this meeting. I said, Marissa, why would you let us specify a $400 recessed square light fixture? In this meeting real time, she says, Kia, I didn't. Here's what I sent to the sub. Even with a 60% markup, our fixture would have been cheaper, right? Now, is anyone going to walk into the building and go, oh my God, this 4-inch square recessed light fixture changed my life? Absolutely not. But if you're doing it with the 4-inch square recessed light fixture, you're doing it with the bio-based floor material, you're doing it with the mineral-based paint, you're doing it with all those, you're doing it with the foam insulation that Michael was trying to get in the building, right? So the minute we continue to gouge the material costs of the things that people inherently deserve, right, we make it inaccessible. So to combat that, we started a procurement company called Lucidity Procurement. So we procure all of our building materials from the drywall out to make sure that the GC or the subcontractor do not do these hidden markups that make the product and materials inaccessible. And Prescott, I'm going to come back to you because you've got my buzzword dignity. I've never been a fan of that word, and I'll tell you why. Anyone know who like Kelly Weatherspoon is, or Nate Berkus, or Jonathan Adler? These are all like big fancy interior designers. No one goes to Kelly Weatherspoon and say, I want a dignified space for my kids. We use dignity as the benchmark for people in disenfranchised community. And I actually deep dive a lot into what is the definition of dignity. But when do we say they deserve more than just dignity? If the bar is already so low, does dignity move the needle at all? So I challenge you, Prescott, to think about the use of that word dignity when talking about low-income communities and people of color.
Yeah, I think that is a beautiful piece of advice for all of us. And I want to thank Prescott just for getting your juices flowing to see that. And all of us are thrilled that you came today. We could just keep going forever. I know I could. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. So please come back and see us again. And if you have time to drop a link in the chat for your procurement company, I would love to see where that is and do a little surfing online for that. And thanks to everybody for coming. If I saw you at VSCon, good to see you again on the little screen. And we are going to miss Construction Tech next week because of the holiday. So enjoy your family, enjoy your friends, enjoy some beautifully grown food, and enjoy some peace. Thanks, Kia. Thanks, everybody.